Hi, everyone out there, America fans and readers. I am Jude Warne, the author of the new Authorized Biography of America the Band, and I'm fortunate to be here now with Gerry, Beckley, and Dewey Bunnell in person, albeit digitally. But we're glad to talk to you. And we had some book events planned, a lovely event in Los Angeles later this month, but of course, with everything that's happened, that's postponed for the time being. And so we thought this would be a nice way to do a version of that. So here we are. Hi, Gerry, Dewey. Good to see you.
Hi,
Hi,
dude.
Jude. Hey, Jude.
That's the song. There, you guys are out in California, and I'm in New York City, and we're all holed up. But I think, it's nice to be able to meet this way. I wanted to ask you guys, being notorious tourers with your band, you're always on tour every year, every month, just always on the road. What has it been like readjusting to not being on the road?
Well, Gerry, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'm usually pretty good at the solitary thing, but of course the snippets that we would come home on a Monday and be back on a plane Wednesday or Thursday. So this is obviously stretched this beyond measure. What some of you might know, you both know, is that I also live in Australia, and so I was here for a month, just waiting for everything in hopes of settling down a bit and see that my boys were good.
Right.
And I'm on tomorrow to Australia. So it's, looking forward to getting back together with my wife. And, the situation there is a little bit less hectic. So it'll be nice to take a little bit of the stress off.
Sure.
Yeah, it's been, well, we're in 35 days, I think, since Gerry and we were on the road. We had just arrived in West Virginia for the beginning of about an 8 or 9 show run, Gerry, over a couple, 2 weeks. Yeah, it was a nice little stretch. So that was on the 11th. We didn't even do the show on the 12th. We arrived there for the first show on the 12th. Flew back on the 12th. 13th was the national emergency, was issued.
Right.
So that's been what? A month and 3 days. So 35 days or 34 days, whatever.
Yes.
So from my perspective, that has been an interesting new change in terms of, we do take a block off, 2 or 3 1-month blocks a year. So we've done that now here. So that's been the extent of the longest stretch that we've probably ever taken off, barring a couple of anomalies. But over the last, 50 years, whatever, we're in our 50th year. That's the other thing that's been obviously interrupted. And the biography was part of this whole 50th anniversary celebration. So everything has been shuffled around. We've got a whole new hand we're playing here. And I think this next month is going to be telling in terms of physical and mental and emotional, isolation in a ways that we've never experienced. And everybody's going through one form of that or another. But as traveling musicians, the definition of our career has been these, traveling minstrels, bards, traveling the country and the world, performing our songs. And that rug has been pulled out for some, undetermined time now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
I land in Sydney. I have a mandatory 2-week quarantine in a hotel.
Wow.
I'm only allowed in because I am married to an Australian. The flights are only allowing returning Australian nationals, but because I'm married to one, I have a deferment or something. So, but everybody, even people who live there, have multiple homes. They have to go to a hotel. You don't get to go to your house. So I have a friend who was on the flight I'm on tomorrow, was on yesterday, and they got taken to the Intercontinental. You choose, so that's actually the lottery winner, because that's a nice hotel. Dewey and I had stayed there before in Sydney, but I don't get any say. So my joke about that is I spend all of April in hotels anyway, so it's not going to be that much.
So wait, you mean your flight travelers don't get to go straight to the Ritz-Carlton?
Can you imagine? Okay, that's Beckley. Beckley, the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah.
No, actually, I've seen the list of hotels. They're all lovely properties, and it'll be good to get. But on a normal April, we'd be in hotels every other day of the month anyway. So
Right.
True.
Have you been using your time a bit differently? I know you were talking about that you have vacations here and there or time away from performing, but have you found yourselves writing more or being more creative with your songwriting inspirations that come up?
Oh yeah, there's a couple albums where actually I've been playing a little more on my guitar than I normally do
That's
in
what
recent years. Yeah, I've really, as Gerry will attest, Gerry's always been a more prolific writer. I've always had to get a kick in the butt for one reason, and this certainly qualifies now as a reason to fill time. And I would hate to say, yeah, I had nothing better to do, so I wrote a song or two, but certainly that's an option. But we've been spending a little more time, my wife and I, with our horse. Some of the listeners may know we got this. We adopted this Mustang 2 years ago now, and she's now at an age where we can start training her. We have a trainer, of course, and I'm learning a lot that way. So that's concentrated time I can put to use. Several hours a day at my jigsaw puzzle, which is right over there.
Do you play the Rolling Stones song "Jigsaw Puzzle" while you're working on it?
No, I haven't. What album was that on?
That reference, that Aftermath or something.
Cake on it, I think. Let It Bleed.
You. Yeah. What was the one with the layered cake cover, Jer?
I think that's the one.
Yeah. Well, you would know that, Jude. But I should do that next. I don't even play music. That's the other thing about your book. I wanted to brush up on the book, which I did a little bit because we had several drafts over the course of the last. What's it been? 18 months since you came on board?
Yes, the interviews went on for 18 months. But I was thinking how I think I proposed the initial idea to both of you. I think after I interviewed Gerry in 2016 about his Carousel album. So that was 4 years ago.
Wow,
a long time.
Yeah. But I was going to say what I'd really like is an audio version. When you're going to have to do that. That's audio. What you can do that in your time off. Then I can just put it on and kick back because my eyes are getting bad. They really are. And this is probably too TMI, but I blur over after a while and I'm trying to read the book.
Well, I would like. We've talked about doing an audiobook down the line, but I think it's been getting more and more popular with Audible and that kind of thing. And I feel like you get through more books that way.
I do. I listen to loads of books on airplanes.
Right.
And I do it at the house, in the gym. That's another thing. Forget the gym.
The gym. What gym?
I'm doing the overeating and baked goods diet here.
Working really well for all of us.
It's working well, yeah. Oh, that's changing in the second month too. No more eating.
It's done. I wanted to ask too, with your time off for the time being, you're both avid readers, and is there anything that you've read lately that you're currently reading or listening to via audiobook that's been?
My official answer is that I'm reading Proust.
Proust the entire time.
But in reality, I actually went back and got all of the Glenn O'Brien books. I had met Glenn once through a mutual friend in New York, and he was a fascinating guy, and he was the editor of Interview magazine during the Warhol years, and then went on to be a contributor for GQ and a bunch of other things. But I really hadn't read his writing, and I read one. I thought, this guy was really great. We lost him a few years ago, but it was. I'm on my third. I think I've been going through all of his books. I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, Gerry is an avid reader. I read a lot. I do read biographies and things. I read, art books, art history a little bit. I'm kind of a jack of all trades in my listening. As I say, I'm listening to books, art books, of course, you can look at. But literally, I'm listening to the White Fang portion of the Jack London, of Call of the Wild and White Fang.
Perfect.
Which is nice. It takes me outdoors, and that particular book is interesting because it's coming from the dog's perspective or the wolf's perspective.
Yes.
And it's pretty fascinating. So I've been immersed in that.
That's very a lot of your nature persona.
Yeah, it does. It takes me out of doors in my mind. But we also watch a lot, and I listen to a lot of just pulpy things, just, crime books, and there's a
Nordic
million of them on Audible. What?
Nordic noir, all
Sure.
those
Well,
definition modes,
that
the bridge, and all of those things.
Oh,
yeah, that's moving to TV. You're right, to Netflix and Hulu and all the above. But I even listen to those kind of things because it's purely escapism.
right.
Any book that I really want to learn something from, I concentrate a lot more, obviously. But I can just drift off and listen to some crime drama, and it just, fills the time, especially now.
Yeah.
So
I
no
did
Bruce.
I did the PBS series, The Roosevelts.
Oh, I've been rewatching that myself.
They re-aired it, and I saw a couple of them.
That
And I
is-
first time round, of course, too busy. But now 7 episodes, each 2 hours long. And a friend of mine, the Mitch Glazer, the producer, said, "Oh no, get the app." And I didn't realize that I didn't have the PBS app. So all of that lovely PBS programming, including the Roosevelts, is there to stream. Man, what a history lesson! It was fantastic. Have you
Yeah.
seen it, middle of it, or where are you, Jude?
I have seen the whole thing in the past, but I've been rewatching it, so I started at the beginning. But I was remembering going to Teddy Roosevelt's house in New York City. Here you can tour it, and being a bit spooked by that kind of as a kid. There's an antique sort of gym that Teddy used to keep in shape and in good health, which is interesting. And there's also the presidential libraries out here in Poughkeepsie, but that's the FDR library, so kind of ties the family.
Yeah,
Well,
those Ken Burns things are fantastic. They always have been. There's a World War one that we were looking at the other night too.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the Roosevelt thing all the way yet, but I really love that old footage, and it really takes you back. The World War one is a colorized one. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Which
I
is
haven't.
bizarre.
I know where they reassembled it or they digitally fixed it or something. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that one. And you're in the trenches with dead horses, and whenever they colorize them, it suddenly there's something that it keeps you away from it when it's black and white. I like black and white. I like the artistic qualities of black and white. But as soon as it goes color, it just seems like, whoa, did they just shoot
But
that?
they also do. You might have read about that. They digitized. They somehow digitally took all of the shake and the shutter out of old film. They digitally filled in the blanks between the frames.
Wow.
That makes it even more real. Yeah.
Not only much smoother, it looks like a real current video, but they also got lip readers to read because obviously there was no sound back then, and the lip readers transcribed. They then went to, because they knew what divisions they were, and they went to all the original towns to get people to read it in the appropriate accents.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it's terrific.
Interesting.
It's coming on the heels of the 1917 film, I guess, or it must have been in the works for a long time.
It was actually before 1917, but yeah, and what's his name? Who's our Kiwi guy, Lord of the Rings? Didn't Peter Jackson have something to do with it? I think he did.
May well, I'm not sure.
Maybe.
I don't read the credits. Except on our book.
Of course, every detail. I wanted to get into just asking some specific things about the book project and what it was like for you guys working with me being interviewed by me while I was working on it. So I wanted to ask you, was there any specific appeal of, this was a while back now in 2016 or 2017, of my biography proposal when it first came across your desk? I know you guys are getting a lot of those on a constant basis in different media ideas for that, but if you recall considering it for the first time, or if you had thought about doing that in the past, having a biography.
I remember, Jude, of course, I remember how this all came about. And Dewey and I had been approached through, friends. Henry Diltz works with a variety of different rock writers and stuff. And it would always kind of get to these, that'd be a great idea. And I've got all these great pictures and he's a really good interviewer and stuff. Great. But you came to us with an actual plan. And I remember you had cut it up into chapters of some sort, like on the first part of the journey, actually used the lyric. And it was like, boy, this lady has done far more prep than any of these other professionals thought, wasn't really on our list, but I think we better take a good look at this because it really seems like somebody's given it some thought. and here we are.
Yeah, and I think in your proposal, it was very appealing that you were going to go through the songs themselves and break down the albums and the songs. I mean, a biography, autobiography, otherwise can be a lot more about the personalities, the times we lived in, our families. But it was very appealing for me, and Gerry and I discussed that you were really getting into the meat of the music, for better or for worse. But I think that was nice because that's really the history. What?
Kind of cute.
Yeah. No, because I mean, you did interview a lot of our contemporaries and friends and got anecdotal information. But I think you have personally analyzed, it's a subjective thing. It is anyway. But you've really broken down specific songs and projects and albums, and then that's the core. And then you've talked about what was happening during the making and who was involved and that kind of thing. And I think that was appealing. And you had sketched that out in your proposal, and I think that certainly was one of the many reasons. And then when we met you, we never changed. We didn't say, forget her. No, we got along well, and it's been a great project.
It's been wonderful for me. I was so grateful too, as one of the components of the project, just being able to interview your colleagues and friends that you were kind enough to connect me with. I was thinking back to different wonderful phone conversations, mostly phone because they tend to be based in California while I'm in New York, but with your friends Bill Mooney and Timothy Schmidt, I got to meet in New York, which was really wonderful. We had a great interview over lunch, and I offered to split the check, and he just looked at me like, it's okay.
Good old Timothy. Yeah.
So that was those like little perks for me as a younger rock writer and as a rock student historian, I like to think of myself as. That was really great. And it enriched the book content, I think, just having these different interviews from different people who worked with you at different points in your lives. I was thinking about that too, where the people I spoke with some of them had worked with you at different periods of your lives. Like I spoke to Phil Galston, who worked with both of you, and Gerry in early 90s, I guess that would be. As opposed to your earliest band members like Willie Leacox, who worked with you from pretty early on in the mid 70s, early 70s. But there was a kind of consistency to the tone of everyone's responses in some ways. And I have a quote at the beginning of the book, which is meant to be a bit funny, where it says, they're such nice guys, and it's attributed to everyone I spoke with. And it's literally everyone said that at some point in each of our interviews, which after a while, I was like, this is really fun.
Could be worse though, Jude. Right?
Of course.
I was on with, I sent the screenshot to Fred Armisen today. Was there a press release today or something? A couple of people, the picture of the book, and there's a quote of Fred's.
Yes, my publisher and my agent and I have been putting that together, just the lovely quotes that have been building up over the last year from your friends and people who have read the book and enjoyed it, like Daniel Rower, the filmmaker. We're trying to just compile those to make them viewable to everyone. So that's the beginning of that.
Yeah. I'm getting calls, I'm getting texts and things.
Thinking of interviewing your different friends that you had during this project, I had the great fortune to speak with Jimmy Webb, and that interview was so wonderful. I ended up adding an additional chapter to the book with a lot of what he had spoken about with working with you guys and his opinions of your career and his career and how they worked together in terms of having a lot of commercial appeal and commercial success, but sometimes looking for further good wishes from more cool or indie type spots or critical people. So he just had a similar opinion or similar experience of his career at that certain period, I guess, of the late 70s. That was
Jimmy. We did a tour with Jimmy, I'm sure he told you, and Jimmy and I ended up we spent a lot of time together. And I remember in Chicago, we had this massive kind of 2-bedroom suite with a grand piano. And somewhere recently, I haven't reviewed it, but there's something has surfaced of the lost Jimmy and Gerry recording, which I'm a little scared to review.
It was
in this day and age, everything is possible.
It was special having Jimmy on the road because he wasn't typically a touring guy. We wanted him to open for us, you know, give us a little cred back in those days, and we became friends. And Gerry will tell you he's Jerry's first son's godfather, right, Gerry?
Right.
Anyway, he was great. He was a lot of fun. He's a serious guy in many ways. I mean, he takes music very seriously, and he's a disciplined writer. And I really respect his, you know, his opinions on music, and the work, the body of work he's done is just incredible. But we had fun with him, and then of course he asked us to sing the lyrical parts of the Last Unicorn project, which is another great isolated thing that we've done in our career that really we're very proud of that. And it's got its own sort of unique audience out there for the last 30 years or however long it's been out there. And it's still, it's as you know, it seems to have transferred generationally. It's a very interesting project.
Yes. It's a great album.
Jude, did you see this latest posthumous release of Harry Nilsson?
No, I didn't.
Put together, and these were the last things that Harry recorded before his passing. What I didn't know was that Harry song of Jimmy's called "What Does a Woman See in a Man," and it is so beautiful. It's the closing track on the Harry album, but it's for those who know, Harry and Jimmy were like brothers. You know, they were incredibly close, and so for fans of both, I can't recommend it enough. It's just fantastic. It's on the end of this latest Harry album, but it's the best of both of them. It's one of Jimmy's most beautiful. Jimmy came to New York to start writing musicals for Michael Bennett, and Michael Bennett was the king of Broadway at the time. And unfortunately, Jimmy was halfway through one of these projects, and Michael was a casualty of the AIDS epidemic. Speaking of that word, and so these things never came to light, and it's some of Jimmy's best work. So it's on that album.
I'll have to listen. We have a saying in my household where all roads lead to Jimmy Webb, because if you start one musical conversation, invariably, I mean, after a couple of connections, it winds up back in something he's worked on or contributed to something. Or
it's Brian for us, you know. Unfortunately, everything turns back. Can't help it.
True, Brian, 6 degrees.
Can I ask you what it was like for you, if you've thought about this, of working on a biography of your entire life, where you were interviewed about different elements of your life, both from being a small child, teenager, into different parts of your career? Was it emotional for you, or was it as you would have expected, or what were your thoughts?
I recall having to think a lot more about with your questions and actually trying to put together the structure of my life as a kid. I'd never really thought that much about it. I mean, obviously you remember certain things, flashes of the past, birthday parties or events, but to actually sit there and try and remember who I was during those very formative years, especially, you know, the sort of 12 to 20 years of the school years, high school, because you were wanting to know where we had been, our inspirations and what musical things. But I thought it was interesting for me to try and look at the chronology of being an Air Force kid and all the moves, because almost each move, and we had many, you close that book and put it away forever because there was some pain involved a little bit. You were losing the comfort of the kids you knew, the home, the bedroom, the weather, whatever it happened to be. And we had some pretty diverse places between Biloxi, Mississippi and Omaha, Nebraska, for example, or Omaha, Nebraska and San Jose, California, Pensacola, Florida. So all of those became little capsules. And in some cases, you know, I'd thrown away the key, if you will, didn't really think about them, short of looking at old photos that family had and things. So to try and really dig up those memories, that was a little bit of an effort. And I don't know that it really clarified who I am that much more, but it certainly allowed me to marvel a little bit at those influences and those experiences, because it's sort of subliminal stuff happens to you. Right. And we've always said that being in Air Force families helped us cope with the road and actually flourish on the road in some cases, or enjoy the road.
Right.
being away from home, because we had developed some skills in that department. And we were exposed to a lot of cultural things. In the US alone, there's so many cultural differences. And I think that prepared us in a lot of ways for going out on the road and playing the shows when we became professional. So that was a highlight.
I think because Dewey and I are both half English, I think that was a constant for us that we could share in a life that didn't have many constants.
Right.
You know what I mean? We were all, like Dewey said, moving all over the place. Imagine for Dan lived in Japan.
Right.
Or
And
Thailand.
Pakistan, right? Yeah.
We didn't have those chapters in our life. I can only imagine how, enriched his life was in a positive way. I'm just, not that it isn't tumultuous, but I hadn't really thought, to answer your question, I hadn't really thought as much about it as I did when we went back over all of this history, because one of the things that unfortunately is a product of this kind of upbringing is you don't have a hometown. Where are you from? For Dewey, when Dewey says he's from Harrogate, Yorkshire, it's like,
Yeah.
it's bizarre. Yeah. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, but I have absolutely no memory of Fort. So you don't have, but we shared in that blank canvas in a way, because we were in a sense lost together. You see what I'm saying, too?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you have, or do you have a favorite part of the book, or favorite reminiscence that you had within the context of the book, or a favorite part of your own story, favorite scene?
Yeah, the bit about me, the George Martin years.
Yeah, those are the.
We always have a strong, bond with those years with George, and
Mm-hmm.
It was the heyday of our career and things. So a lot of things were more clear in our memory in one form or another. And I think you really, we were able to describe that to you, and you funneled it into the book, I thought, nicely. I mean, there was some interesting. Go on, Gerry.
I was going to say, we say on stage every night that we group those years as the George Martin years, but each one of those projects very different continents. We did them all over the world. And recently, somebody has gone back and is digging up all of the history of the Montserrat studio that George Martin built. And they knew that we had worked there. Well, for Dewey and I, that was just a blip. It was like a week on the way between California sessions and London sessions. I think we did some overdubs for a week. But for somebody looking into the minutiae of the entire Montserrat art, which is quite fascinating.
Well, we were actually the second band. What's it called? Chicago Climax Band.
Yeah.
I think they were the first ones to be Climax Chicago. What? Say it again.
Climax Chicago Blues Band.
Blues Band. Anyway, I think they were technically the first band in there, but we'd been working with George for a few years by then anyway. And so it was really nice to experience that. And it was a short time. You're right, Gerry, it was about a week. Might have been a little more, but
was that the Silent Letter sessions?
Silent Letter, yeah. Was I think it was overdubs. It might have been singing or something, because it was just us. We didn't take the band.
Right.
No.
Just
I remember having Dylan there, my son, and family, so it was kind of a vacation-y thing as well. But it was interesting. It was another experience that you can't duplicate. I mean, we were living there on the property, and very British island, so you had this British feel to everything. And we ate at night together and had local dishes like goat water soup. Goat water, which was goat soup. And
Wow.
yeah, I don't know why we remember that. But George liked to structure things. Everything was very proper, and there was cocktail hour and dinner time, and he didn't like to overwork us, and like sometimes we could go off on a tangent. No, let's keep going for another 5 hours. No, lads, we'll pick it up tomorrow. That was generally speaking in all the George Martin projects. We would rarely, because up until George got involved, yeah, we would sometimes just record through the night and beat things to death. But it was very proper and nice structure.
I have a couple of personal favorite parts of your story and in the book, but one of them is the crossover period when you decided in the 80s, after you had made Perspective, which was 1984, you kind of revamped your whole tour engine that you had going, and kind of recreated your, or reestablished your identity as a band within the rock world very successfully, at a point where you could argue some other acts weren't able to do that well. And that's one of my favorite parts of when it was a bit, I guess, rocky for a period, when you played some lesser halls and were reorganizing where you were going to play and how you were going to do your tours. So
Oh yeah, that's really nice that you. That's another thing about this book. You know, you seem to have really felt the pulse of the trajectory as the band went, and certainly there was some really tough times there where we could easily have called it a day after Dan's departure, after the early sort of changing. The world itself was changing. The music world was changing, and we were really passé. And the singer-songwriter thing had run its course to some degree, and we've never been one to adapt that well to genres of music, the new wave movement, or the burgeoning pop country world, or glam rock, dare I say. So yeah, we were in a trough. There was a real trough, and the shows weren't doing as well. And we had expanded to as big as a 7-piece at one point. And of course, that had now shrunk back to 5, our original bass player and drummer. Our original drummer. And we had to find a new bass player about that time, Brad Palmer. The chemistry changed. The basic operation, the way it ran, seemed to be not running on 4 cylinders for a while. I think that's almost fair to say. But we were a working band, so we had to go out.
When you hear somebody talk about how long they've been at the firm, I've been 20 years at this firm, or 25 years. In our firm, in our organization, Michael Woods was with us for 41 years.
Right.
And Willie was with us for 43 or 44 years. An immense amount of time. When you look at that. That's a career numbers. And and that's a few chapters ago. So it gives you an idea of the scope of it.
Right.
But we did persevere. I think that's the one thing we've always done. Gerry and I have said, this is what we do, and we're going to continue to do it through thick or thin in one form or another. Who knows what that form might take. But if we can keep it as a band and keep it, as this organic live show, we've never really augmented the show with too many bells and whistles. We're up there trying to play our instruments, sing our parts. And I think that was what forged us through. And, that's all we've known in our whole lives, is this creating music and then performing it live. And every night is, like we've said, it's like painting the picture again and again and again every night,
Right.
The equivalent of, and hoping that we can make it that little bit better every time. So we had to forge through that, and it was lucky. That was about the time that Jim Morey took over management too, and he had guided us in a way that we might not have come up with ourselves, i.e., beginning to use some outside writers, because we were exclusively our own guys then, writing our own music, and it became obvious we needed to try some different things. And he made it clear that if he had his way, we would tour outside the country much more than we were at that time. We were just doing 2-3 long tours a year, mostly domestically, and a couple of little things. But he pushed us well out of the U.S. to create a vacuum or a demand, or it was a smart move in retrospect, because we developed more followings outside the country, especially in South America.
Right.
We had a good, strong following in Australia, UK. He got us into Italy a lot more, doing big venues, big international song shows, song contest shows and things. The San Remo Festival comes to mind. That was a huge thing. In Germany, and then we played more in the Philippines. We developed a big following in the Philippines. We did entire tours of the U.S. Air Force bases around the Pacific Rim. So we found ourselves in Guam, in Okinawa, in Alaska, wherever there were U.S. bases, up on the DMZ in Korea, played South Korea, and then went up to the DMZ. Those are some special, unique times. And again, it added to who we were, and it brought us back to touring the US domestically a little more, with a lot more experience, if you will, and whatever that brought to the table.
Can I ask you how you felt about how Dan was represented in the book? We had several conversations going into the project preparation about how we wanted that to go, and we all agreed, I think, that we wanted Dan to be the third character as he was in the real story up until his departure in 1977. So I worked hard on making sure that that worked well with the sort of representation of characters and stuff.
I think you used his words quite a bit, didn't you, Jude? Didn't you go to his? Because he wrote a pretty involved serial history that he posted at the earlier days of the internet. And I think that was a great idea, because obviously otherwise you're not going to get Dan on tape, but you would just go into friends and family and stuff. So I think it was really a gift, first of all, that you were able to weave that into the whole story, because he's not a missing member in the story. You know, his voice and his part of the history is well represented.
I think so.
Yeah, we've always, as you know, Jude, we've always told you during our interviews that Dan was an integral part of the Three Musketeers in those beginning days, and his role was just, it was irreplaceable. So all the songs he wrote, that whole camaraderie we had, that was something that was lost when he left, and when those years we talked about earlier sort of went into a slump. There was a whole new character to the band without Dan.
Right.
And I think you did represent him well, and that was the best way. He really had put a lot of time into that book. Granted, it was a subjective view, but there were a lot of, because we said this before, we all remember things that little bit differently.
Sure.
Sometimes shockingly differently. But it was, nevertheless, that was Dan's memories, and a lot of facts in that book are things that we've drawn on too, because they were things that we didn't see from that perspective and he saw from his perspective. And so I think it was absolutely important and credible that Dan be represented in the book. And then, having said that, he left in 77, and here we've put another 40 years into the band's life. You had to flesh that all out, the after Dan years.
Yes. And I had that was wonderful. I got to speak to David, Dan's brother, which was he had some nice memories of your early formations together and being teenagers and getting the band going at the beginning that I hadn't heard, which are fun, and they can be found in the book.
And he was a baby then, practically. He was a little kid. Yeah, we remember David from then.
I wanted to ask you as well, how in general do you feel about younger people? There are younger people at your shows that I've seen. Every show I've been to a number of the more or less the New York City area shows, but there's always a very diverse crowd and a full crowd. And I wanted to ask how you felt about a younger person writing about your history who wasn't there. So there's less nostalgia, theoretically. It's more of a historical tone. Just how you felt about that, and how you feel about how younger people continue to respond to your music even now.
Well, first of all, I think that was a great, that chemistry really came out well. Jude, that's a testament to you, of course. What we did, we've done. And as long as our brain cells are firing, at least our recollections are going to be as accurate as we can. But how that's interpreted and through what eyes that's looked at, I think this chemistry worked out really, really well. So, beyond that, it's hard. I remember, Dewey will remember this, when we first started gigging, we did a lot of shows with the Beach Boys. And we were much younger then, and they were like, the real inspiration. But glaringly apparent, you'd look out and you would see these generations of fans and little kids, little blonde kids, they're dancing along, singing fun and stuff. Clearly they weren't around when this stuff first came out, but it became part of the DNA. And so for Dewey and I, we thought, that's amazing. That stuff shows the power of music. And now, unfortunately, it's 50 years, but we see the same thing. We see three generations, kids that know, and, they do the drum fill and sister, and, they song to all the hits. It's a fantastic feeling. And that's a testament to, first of all, the music, but also the devotion of the parents. You know, they kind of raise the kids on the stuff, and it's really great.
Yeah, and actually, Jude, you're an example of a young person hopefully appreciating the music,
Yes.
and I think you do, and you've said so much in the book. But it is amazing still. We always had, even in the beginning when we were 20 years old, literally 20, 21, 19, when that first album came out, it seemed like we had a broad audience. There were older people, older than us, and there were young people, and there were our own generation. But I think at the end of the day, you're hoping that the music you're making with your contemporaries in those early years reflects an emotion or a feeling of living a young person's life. And granted, we're trying to describe our emotions and feelings at the time, but I always thought we were reflecting our generation and what people would have been thinking and feeling along with us. So it's nice to think that transcends to the next generation, and hopefully they're responding to those lyrics, those melodies that strike a chord with young people in some form or another.
I think they do.
Pardon?
I think they do, really, in terms of the classic element of your catalog. And a lot of it theoretically has to do with it's the themes that you have touched on in your different songs over the years tend to be the eternal themes, like love, peace, happiness, that are always applicable. And that's partly, I think, why they translate to different generations, why they spoke to me. To me, it seems to be the best, in my opinion, version of the Woodstock generation's ideology, without a lot of the baggage that could have gotten attached to some of the material that came out at that time, with being overly political or something, overly topical.
Bingo.
Yeah.
but
I know
I think what, Gerry?
Survivors. I said, I know what baggage she's thinking about. We came through relatively unscathed, and I'd like to say we're responsible for that, but I think we just had an immense amount of good luck.
The other element, though, of that, too, the younger thing, or generation younger than us, is the artists who we really were pleased to hear, especially making the Here and Now project with Adam Schlesinger, rest in peace, currently, that he brought in people that were drawn to us, artists, I mean, not just listeners in general, fans in the public, who expressed, some interest in us and the work we'd done, and it has inspired them in one way or another. So that's another satisfying reality about a younger generation getting involved with the music, and it's nice to think that possibly some songs are out there that were inspired by us.
Right. I think too, when I was looking for a project to work on at the time, I'd gotten out of grad school, or I was on my way out, and I had written about Bruce Springsteen in long form and analyzing his Darkness album from '78. And I wanted to write a book that would be involved with rock and roll history, the real deal. And when I came across your catalog, I had been exposed to it before and heard about it before and loved it before. But when I really got into the deep cuts and sorts of things, it was when I had been going through like a bit of an anxious period. I think that transitory thing when you leave school and go into another part of your life. And when I found my parents had been playing it for me, the catalog, the greatest hits really initially, I felt like I'd found my sort of identification with what I had been looking for, which I had seen and felt in the Beatles before for years. But then with your version of it, it just seemed more sharp, the articulation of the feeling. And just being able to write about a legendary band's entire career was really what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate that you were responsive to my ideas about your lives and career and my vision. But also I was thinking about this when you hadn't read any of the manuscript for a while. We had been interviewing for about a year probably at that point. I mean, you had seen my plans and stuff, but it was I was a bit nervous showing you or sending you the manuscript, because there are some opinionated things about different songs in there, and then there's a definite vision. And I'm just so glad that you responded well to it.
Well, I could say that, yeah, that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, right? Yes. When you did send us the first drafts, I was thrilled. I thought it was fantastic. The opening lines and the way you painted the picture of the times right then, coming out of the 60s into the 70s. I thought it was a really nice way to bring us into it. But it was beyond my expectations. Not that I had any. I think we'd agreed that the proposal, if Jude sticks to any part of that proposal, it's going to be great. But I think it's really been expressed our place in the times through our music, with a lot of other elements. But that's essentially a great part of this thing.
Yeah,
we're very proud of it, Jude. I'm sure when it, we will be your biggest supporters in this. I think you've done a wonderful job.
Thank you so much.
Well, when we can get Billy Bob Thornton to write the intro, he wouldn't put his name on anything that wasn't. He was pretty happy. He read a lot of it too.
That was great. Some of the wonderful moments of being a younger writer, more at the beginning of my career, and just having moments like that with being able to meet your colleagues and friends and being connected with people like Billy Bob Thornton and the beautiful piece that he wrote. Just wonderful, exciting things for me. So thank you.
Same for us, actually. He's a pretty unique dude.
Mm-hmm. May I ask you or do you have a favorite music book or music biography? And do you connect that with your story with this book? Is there anything that connects those things for your readers, both of you?
At the risk of proving your point, Jude, I went through every chapter of Toonsmith, which was
Jimmy Webb.
Well, now I've read a lot. I don't think I've read quite as many as Dewey, but I've read a lot of biographies, and they're all fascinating. I did Jeff Twee's recently, and let me think. Somebody. No, David Lynch. He's not a musician. Was kind of a musician, but Jimmy's was quite technical, and and I'm a student of that kind of stuff. But I remember in the book it said, if you really don't want to get into this particular minutia, skip chapters 2 through 7. But I hung with it and everything. So I like to tout that book if ever given the opportunity, because it was for a struggling singer songwriter or something. There's no better teacher.
Right, I love that book.
Yeah, and I read biographies in general quite a bit, whatever piques my interest at a given time. And Brian Wilson's biographies and autobiographies.
Yes.
He's got a couple of them, and I remember and some Grateful Dead stuff that are in depth, and they talk about the basically the culture that the Dead have developed around them, and they're fascinating and interesting. We're obviously not in that category necessarily, but the Greg Allman book, My Cross to Bear, was painful to read in a lot of ways, because being Allman Brothers fans too, we kind of grew up with them and worked with Greg. That one, but again, that wasn't parallel to this one. It wasn't similar in many ways, because it was more about struggles and the pain and suffering of the Allman Brothers, and how that created this great body of work that and what a talent Greg was. Some guys are just, they're savants. They're made to do what they do, and those kind of biographies are interesting and fascinating, because Greg was like made himself a blues singer. He came from an environment, but he did other things in the beginning of his career, and then he became this guy we know as Greg Allman. But I think Gerry and I this is a really nice way to look at how we grew up in the business and managed to create music in it, and it wasn't upheaval in our lives. It's a double-edged sword, getting fame and fortune, and we've had to survive some pretty rocky places in our lives, and as do so many people. It's like we're nothing special that way. But in the pantheon of biographies, musical ones that I've read, I can see that this is going to be a solid addition, and it just happens to be about us. But I think if I'm a reader, hopefully what we're doing is trying to get people who don't know who we are to maybe see, who are these guys? Who are they? A lot of our fans have followed us for decades, and they know us, in some ways as friends. We have, as we dub them, the 9 fans. We only have 9 fans in the whole world.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have more than that, but we have some that we're close to.
I'd be curious, Jude, to see if you get feedback, we put it mildly, but I remember, because we were close with George Martin and Jeff Emmerich for all of those years, when Jeff wrote his book, everybody who had kind of just made their decision about the world and the Beatles and George Martin had a but a determined view on how it was. And then Jeff gave another perspective, and I would get calls after Jeff's book because it conflicted with, it's not what I understood to be. And, you know, we were having to comment on how Jeff had portrayed all of his pivotal years with Beatles. But it'd be interesting because I'm sure that people have pretty determined ideas of what Dewey and our story and Dan's story is. Now that you've put it into actual words, I'm curious and actually quite interested to see what kind of flack you get about that. That can't be right. Kind of, if it runs against people's predetermined concepts, you know.
I'm sure.
And one of the pitfalls of being kind of overnight successes, as we were always described, you can't, that first impression, that's such a classic line that really is true. You're judged by your first impression, and it's really hard to shake any elements of that, even if you wanted to. Maybe you don't want to. Maybe it was such a great beginning, that first impression is important. But I think the fact that we had a #1 record, both single and album, coming out of the box
right away,
like, who are these guys and are they deserving? And in most cases, people say no. I mean, how can you have paid your dues? How can you have walked the long, lonely road to success and had a #1 record, #1 album, and got the Grammy for Best New Artist? And that's been hard to shake.
That seemed to happen after for you, just in a different sort of timeline, where you did prove, you didn't need to prove them necessarily, but you did prove your dues over the decades that followed. You just happened to have, like you're saying, this immediate success, which was well deserved, but interesting.
So that a book like this will describe that fact. Not that I'm trying to justify it. I mean, having #1 record is, nobody has any control over that really anyway. But to continue, I think we've been trying to say, and you show it in the book, that we have never stopped following our path, following the course, you know. And yeah, we probably did it in reverse. We did pay those dues of having a hard time selling tickets and selling no records after the fact, and then we kind of rose somewhat like a phoenix, but not exactly,
like that.
to become kind of a staple now on the concert circuit and a classic rock veteran act. All these labels, you know, I mean, it's crazy, but basically, it's great to be able to show that in one book, your book, how much traveling, or how much time has passed.
Yes. I think too, personally, looking at your career over the 50 years, it really is sort of it's its own beautiful thing, but it's also a textbook case of how the music industry evolved over the last 50 years, the different trends that came into it and different adaptations that had to be made to your approach in terms of the touring organization, and to focus more on touring rather than albums, was really, I think your band was ahead of the curve with that. Almost every artist ended up doing that and still does that today, or has up until recently, where the main game is in touring, and you figured that out so early, which I thought was so smart.
And we've tried to develop that live show. It's a living, breathing thing. And the live show, we learned the hard way in many cases, the actual structure of the set, the running order, what songs you pick, 22 songs, 25 songs, where you put them. It's a breathing thing. And if something isn't put in the right place, you can physically or audibly see the crowd get antsy, or so maybe that song that you tried this summer, you decide, let's not do that the following summer. Right. Or maybe when you put these two songs together, it really keeps the trajectory of the show going. And you know, that's a learning thing. That's something you can only figure out by doing it year after year. Mm-hmm. So, and then we've added video behind us. We've tried to enhance the show. Some cool guitars Gerry brings out. Yeah. We try to make this an interesting thing, because there's audiophiles, there's first timers out there. Like we said, there's young people, there's old fans that have been there forever. So you're trying to satisfy them all in some way or another. You can't please everybody all the time, but
I think you do that so well. I know your fans now are missing you since you're always on tour. I think such a big part of your fan base is about, and they look forward to seeing you all across the country and the world. Hopefully soon, or in the as soon as possible that'll get going again. I wanted to ask you, do you have anything you'd like to say directly to your fans, or any advice about hanging in there during a difficult time right now?
The coronavirus?
Yes.
Well, Jared, those baskets behind you look suspiciously like the coronavirus.
Oh, no.
But it is it's a tough time, and everybody's just got to hang in there. And I believe in the general concept of social distancing and trying to, flatten the curve. I know we've heard it over and over for the last month, and there's maybe months ahead of us. And that's actually, it's a terrible thought because it creates a lot of anxiety. And needless to say, what you were talking about, Gerry and I are used to playing. The band is. Our band members are sitting home. Mm-hmm. There's lost income. We don't know what kind of world, economically, socially, we're going to be stepping into when we come out of our respective huddles here. I mean, it's going to be a new, it's so cliche, but it is going to be. If other times were cliche, this one probably won't be. I think it's going to be a truly different world at the point that we've all experienced this. There's so many elements to it, but I think the last thing I want to do is step out into it and have it rekindle the disease itself, because we're going to have a hard enough time getting the wheels turning again and oiled again to get out there and recreate our lives,
sure.
Let alone have to battle it again.
I think you will agree, Jude, that, and we'll just call them the 9 fans again, but if they know anything about us, Dewey and I in the band, it's obviously apparent that we will be out there as soon as it is possible, safe to do it. I mean, because it is what we do, and so I don't think anybody would hear that and go, I don't know. They know us, and they know that that's where we will be as soon as we can, and we look forward to it. Frankly, probably maybe even more than they do.
I'm sure.
Yes, we absolutely can't wait to get back out. As we said, it's just a drag to have to be sitting here spinning our wheels, and
I know
it'll be good when it is, when we do finally get out there.
So with that, I'll wrap this up. It was wonderful talking to both of you. A mini virtual book event in lieu of hopefully down the line we'll do that in person, and we can have a signing. We've been trying to do that with the fans to show up at that too. So that will happen. And
when can we get a case of books? When is that?
The official date is May 15th. You should be
I'm getting requests.
Yes, they're in the next couple of weeks. They should all be going out to everyone who was involved and to people who've done pre-orders, which is wonderful. Fans are excited.
For the record, I've pre-ordered.
So you don't have to pre-order, but thank you. Great. Great. Right. So we hope Thank you to both of you so much.
Thanks, Jude.
You
can remember your name.